sunshine today. All right, I hope the bugs aren't too bad. My kids were jumping on the trampoline at home, or that was their big plan. Today's actually Memorial Day, and the road by the house is pretty busy, so I'm just out here by an area they call the gravel pit. You can see the fence. This used to be old pasture land, the Revard farm. Before I forget, I'm going to be in Bozeman, Montana. Find it. June. Pull out the old depression device. June 10th. That's a Thursday, I believe. 7 p.m. Cavalry Chapel in Bozeman, Montana. It'll be an outreach event. They're going to be serving elk burgers. Beforehand, I believe, I will have the information on the description of this video. But if you're in the central Montana area, elk burgers and some hunting stories, some fellowship. Obviously, the goal of these things is to witness to definitely unsaved people, particularly people that wouldn't otherwise, set foot into a church. I guess that's kind of the goal of an outreach. And having spoke at these things, that's kind of what's leading me to, start Trust the Guide, I guess, is to try to witness to people who were like me, that found it hard to relate to a man of the cloth, so to speak, and struggled to make sense of church. Got a hawk flying in the background. So I'll have the that information on there, on the description, as far as how to contact it, what and where. But I think it's just tickets at the door. It's $5 admission. So that's the deal. And you come early, eat some elk burgers. Beautiful day here in Scotty. I actually just returned a few days ago from Alaska, so I was absent for a few weeks here. Went spring brown bear hunting on the Alaska Peninsula. If this is the state of Alaska, let's say my hand, so I guess the border runs north to south here with the Yukon, and then the Kodiak Island would be down here, Anchorage would be down here, Brooks Range up here, Alaska Range through here, way down here, and then this would tail out into the Aleutian Islands. I was right near the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. Kodiak brown bear is just a brown bear that lives on Kodiak Island. I think it's 40 miles across the Shelikof Strait, so I don't know when water levels were low or whatever, if there was a reduced distance there between, but presumably the bears swam. Maybe it was all one piece of land at one time, I don't know, but it's basically the same bears on Kodiak. Their skulls, they've kind of evolved a little different, that their skulls have a tendency to be wider. So for record book purposes, the Kodiak brown bears are a little bit bigger on the average. Certainly we get record book bears on the Alaska Peninsula. But it seems like the Alaska Peninsula bears are longer limbed, longer nose to tail. So the square of the bear, in my opinion, is bigger on the Alaska Peninsula. Body mass is probably bigger on Kodiak. Skull bigger on Kodiak on the average, but very, very similar. But definitely different. Yeah, you can definitely tell the difference. When you get a 10-foot bear on Kodiak, generally speaking, in my experience, you've got a monster. You've got a 15-year-old hulking bear. I would say on the average, this would just be a rough estimate, I would say that on Kodiak, it takes a bear somewhere between 12 and 15 years to reach 10 foot. That'd be just kind of an average. I would say on the peninsula, it probably takes more like 10 to 12 years to reach 10 foot. But that said, a bear is cubed and not squared. You know, that 10 foot, that's the square measurement of a bear hide. So length of the nose to tail, length front claw to front claw, add them together, divide by 2. So the average of the length and the width. So like a 10 footer on the Alaska Peninsula is probably not going to weigh as much as a 10 footer on the on Kodiak Island, because it's probably going to be older, more filled out. So I often say, you know, like a 9 foot bear, particularly on the Alaska Peninsula, is going to be very limmy, kind of like a 13 to, you know, 16-year-old kid. Actually, about the way I look anymore, kind of weak and thin. But they won't be filled out. So a 9 foot bear on the Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak too to agree, but a 9 foot bear, 8.5 foot bear is going to look like a teenager. They're long, limmy. You're gonna see that they're long, but they're skinny. They're not filled out yet. And so the length, you know, generally speaking, is there, but they just haven't built up that mass. And so it's a big difference between a 9 foot bear and a 10 foot bear. If you figure 9 times 9 is 81. So the square, that'd be 81 square feet. Times 9 again, let's cube it, it would be 728 or 729 if my math is right. So the cube of a 9 foot bear would be 729. Now you take a 10 foot bear, you got 10 times 10, that'd be 100. So the square would be 81 versus 100. But cube that. So 10 times 10 times 10, 1,000. So a 9 foot bear, that's probably not too far off from what they're going to weigh. So a 9 foot bear cubed is going to be 729 pounds. A 10 foot bear is going to be about 1,000 pounds. So that's probably more like what the difference between a 9 foot bear and a 10 foot bear actually is in body mass. As usual, I had no idea that's where I was going with it, but it's kind of an interesting tidbit, I think. A little bit of info there. So, I was in the Alaska Peninsula, spring brown bear. We didn't get to hunt last spring because of COVID. So typically on the Alaska Peninsula, we hunt there every other spring, every other fall. So once a year. So one year it's spring, next year it's fall. They do that, that's how they limit the harvest, the take of the bears there, is they just limit the time or the seasons. Rather than shorten the season in length, they just do it that way. You know, whatever, seems to work. Kodiak, they hunt every spring, every fall, but they just limit the number of bears taken in each area. Yeah, the deer flies are kind of rampant here. But it was really good to get away. It's only a 16-day season, so the way we were doing it is we would have a 16-day hunt, which is huge. You know, let's say if an outfit has 10 bears, 10 hunters out in the field, generally speaking, in that window, you know, sometimes you'll go 3-4 days, nobody will kill a bear, and you know the conditions just aren't right, too cold, too windy, too whatever. And then all of a sudden you'll get like this 2-day window where out of those 10 hunters, you know, 6 of them will shoot bears in those 2 days. So like any kind of hunting, conditions are kind of everything, and that was no different. This spring was particularly tough. I was guiding a hunter by the name of Todd from Tennessee. Todd T from Tennessee. Good dude, yeah, really enjoyed hunting with Todd. He actually came hunting deer with me with a friend of his, Mike, last fall, so I knew Todd a little bit. And at the start, Todd said he's like, I'm looking for, you know, just a good bear, you know, 9.5, maybe low 9s. He's like, I know that, you know, not everybody shoots a 10-foot bear. So it started off pretty typical. We got landed in on a beach, you know, we set up our tent the day before season, everything was good. We're in a pretty good spot, a spot I've hunted before. There wasn't much snow, everything seemed about right to me. It was like 48 degrees during the day. Alaska Peninsula is known for its wind. You've got that thin strip of land. anywhere from, a few miles wide to like, we're way down on the tip, so it's getting pretty narrow. So you've got the Bering Sea on one side, Pacific Ocean on the other, very different in temperature, those two water masses, and pretty violent. There's a lot of volatility there in those two big bodies of water. So the winds particularly have a tendency to be pretty severe, more so than Kodiak. Kodiak gets its fair share of bad weather too, no doubt. So we started off, I think the first 2 days we saw one bear, which I was pretty surprised. I was real amazed. So I don't think our where we were wasn't a hot spot. We didn't have a lot of southern exposure where we were at to get greens, but there was enough to eat there. And then on the third day it started picking up. I think the most bears we saw in the entire hunt was maybe like roughly 10, counting sows and cubs as one, about 10 bears. We were up on this knob, we had to hike, it was about a half mile, and then we could see really good up there. The wind was great in that it was coming from the land blowing out into the ocean, so that was ideal that it wasn't blowing our scent from the sea to the land where we were blowing out the country. So everything was pretty good in that route. We had probably a low 9s boar, a good bear, I'd say 9.2 to 9.4. That'd just kind of be about my guess. He wouldn't have hit 9.5. He'd have been at least 9, somewhere between 9 and 9.5. He was trailing a sow. It was pretty cool. They came right up to our glass and knob, like, I don't know, 40 yards away, 50 yards away tops. And finally, we were kind of just standing up where they could see us. He had a pretty darn nice hide too. That was, he had a good hide. Yeah, no doubt about it. Eventually, he saw us and, he ran off, and the sow, I don't know what she did. She just kind of continued on and kind of disappeared in the alders. So he ran off. We ended up seeing that same bear, I think, breed a sow, I don't know, presumably a different sow, for several days. He kind of hung out with her, and that's pretty typical. They'll court for a couple of days, if you want to call it courting. Typically the female kind of like, the timing isn't right. The male's just standing by, and then once the time's right, the female's all about it. And then the dude, he's kind of like, kind of just like people, the chase is more exciting perhaps sometimes. Once she's coming into heat and he's breeding her, she wants to be bred all the time, and he'll breed her for a while, and then after that he just wants to take a nap and lay around, and she's teasing him, trying to get him to follow him all the time. So we watched them. We had another bear, another sow by herself came up and was just on the same trail, probably about an 8.5, maybe 9 foot, a mature sow. We'd watched it come all the way along a beach. She came up the same trail within like 40 yards and had her standing up on her feet, and we had to run her off. And then the one day I was filming eagles or ravens or something, and I had this little, we were kind of on a big flat knob there, and we had like different perches at different angles, and and we'd glass for a half hour or so, and then we'd go to a different spot and kind of get a different angle, look at different sections of the terrain that we were glassing. There was this one little perch, and it was right on the edge of this rocks, and it was a cliff, and it went down maybe about 100 feet straight down, but there was this nice little flat spot there, and so I'd lay there and back up on the main knob where we'd set our packs and stuff every day. I was filming something, the bird, and then all of a sudden Todd's like, "There's a bear!" And I'm like, "Where? Down in the flat?" And he's like, "No, right there." And so here this bear, I was like 20 yards away and just popped up, and it was right by, we had no idea that it was there. It was right by that little ledge that I would glass from, right on the edge of the cliff. Well, it turned out to be a sow with a newborn cub. So just, the cub was just like the size of a raccoon. So that was kind of interesting. Had I been in that glassing spot when she showed up, would have been pretty exciting, I'm sure. We had about a 9.5 footer walk right underneath our glassing knob. He was badly rubbed. We definitely wouldn't have shot him. But yeah, he walked 100 yards right below us. That would have been a perfect scenario. Saw another bear that we figured was about 9.5. I think we saw him once or twice. He was following a sow with a cub. Yeah, he never got close enough and just never offered an opportunity. Then we didn't see him again. But about day 4, we saw a giant. Saw this sow. She was actually pretty darn smart. Watched her, and she kind of did a loop. She came down to the beach. She was about a little over a mile and a half away. And then she went down in, not into the salt water, but on the beach. And then she did a loop around this little cape. There was a little knob, a peninsula that stuck out. And so then she did a loop and went back around out of sight and away from us. So it was about an hour later, I spotted this bear, and I mean, it just took one look. You know, it was one of those no doubters. Todd looked at that thing through my spotting scope, and we're like, I mean, that's what you come to the Alaska Peninsula for. That's the bear, you know. He looks at that thing and he's like, yeah, he's like, what do we do? I said, well, we'll just watch it here for now. And he was right on that trail of that sow, went down to the beach, onto the rocks, and followed her right around that cape and walked out of sight. And after that, he's like, you know, he's like, I'm totally cool going home without a bear. He's like, after seeing that bear, he's like, there's a big difference between a 10-foot, you know, that was a 10-foot plus. He's like, I see what you're saying. There's a big difference between a 9.5 and a 10-foot bear. And I said, yeah, you know, that's it. You know, that's like a 180 plus inch whitetail right there. And he's like, man, he's like, that's what I want. And he's like, you know, he's like, so as far as I'm concerned, we're holding out for that bear or the equivalent to that bear. And in my mind, I really love that. I appreciate that. Then there's no pressure on anybody, you know. And not only that there's no pressure, but it's like then you can just enjoy the hunt. At that point, you're there for the hunting experience. You know, yeah, you're trying to get a big bear, but it's not like, hey, I'm here. You know, I've talked about it before that if you're a trophy hunter, you have to be willing to go home without one. If you try to do too many things, you wind up not doing any of them right. And so if you have to get a bear at all costs, but you want to try to get the biggest bear possible, I get it. You know, I mean, I get it. But you lose something in that process. Because you're constantly having to weigh everything out. It's like, well, do I take him? Do I risk going home without one, or do I shoot, you know, this bear? He's not what I want, but if I don't, maybe I'll never get an opportunity. And that gets pretty agonizing and frustrating at times. And it kind of takes away from the enormity of it all, the experience. And so when he told me that, we had a 16-day season, and I'm like, that's fine by me. I got nowhere where I gotta be. The only problem was Todd he had a black bear hunt scheduled out of Homer with a friend of his, Mike, that actually came deer hunting with me in this past fall, that he had to get to, and so it gave him 11 days to hunt. And I'm like, man, I see, you just call Mike and tell him, you know, we're hunting brown bears. You can hunt black bears anytime. Todd had hunted black bears several times before, so he had shot quite a few black bears. And so Todd would never really say whether he was willing to do that or not, but I kind of got the impression, you know, he didn't want to, which I get. So we saw a wolf the one day, we saw some otters, we saw a fair number of caribou, a lot of moose, but we never did see that big old bear again. We were seeing like one new bear a day on average. So it seemed to me like the bears this year were kind of, I'm guessing that, because kind of across the whole Alaska Peninsula, it sounds like the same story. Not a ton of bear movement. So what I think was happening is a lot of the bears were breeding. So a lot of boars and sows were kind of locked down in breeding mode, not really moving too much. I always kind of find, like with whitetail hunting, that's kind of the case, is the pre-rut is the ideal time. You want to time it out so that you're hunting like right before the first does come into heat, or maybe when the first couple come into heat, so that, you know, the bucks know it's time and they're just waiting for that first one. When you hit it like that, that's dynamite. But during the peak of the rut, I find, particularly like archery hunting, you know, here in Wisconsin, the peak of our rut's about the 8th of November, maybe the 6th, something like that. But I find the last few days of October to be the best, and the first few days of November, because the does aren't in heat yet. Bucks are receptive to calling. They're moving a lot because they're trying to find that first doe in heat. So I think what we were running into this spring is that the bears were together breeding, not a lot of searching going on. So, you know, if you were lucky enough to have a sow in heat in front of you, you know, you were golden, but the boars weren't roaming so much. That's just kind of what I noticed. So anyways, we had one bad weather day. It blew about 70, or gusted 70 up on the hill there. So we took that afternoon off, but other than that, we were hunting the whole time. Of course, it's raining and it's, you know, blowing 20. That was one thing Todd said of the whole hunt, that he just didn't expect it to be blowing all the time. You know, once in a while you'd get in the mornings, might get down to like 5 to 10 miles an hour, but, you know, by and large, it was blowing somewhere between 15 and, you know, 20 was kind of the average. We hunted long and hard. There were some of those days we were sitting on that hill for 14 hours. And so the second to last day, Todd's second to last day, the forecast for the next day was to blow 30 miles an hour. And so usually when it was like a 30 mile an hour wind, up on that hill, we're getting like, and it was calling for like 80% chance of rain, which is basically 100% in that place. Up on that hill, then we'd end up getting probably, you know, 50, 60 mile an hour wind gusts. And that tarp that I set up, if you watch any of my videos, you've seen that. The tarp can stand about 30 miles an hour. And if it's raining, which it had been all day that day, but we were able to, you know, keep the tarp up because it wasn't super windy. If it's raining and it's, you know, blowing 30, it's not any fun at a bare minimum. It's about impossible. Your optics get soaked and you end up just kind of sitting there. You know, you try to huddle out of the wind as best you can, but it gets nigh impossible. So we kind of figured that was, you know, for all intents and purposes, quite likely our last day of hunting. And then after that point, you know, we're just going to have to try to get out, you know, get a weather window where Todd could get out, get back to Anchorage, go to Homer, you know, and go on his next hunt. So we sat up on that hill till just about dark. It was really slow that evening. And that afternoon, the wind was picking up a little bit, and we just decided, hey, let's go back to camp, and I had to get water. So we had this spring about 100, 200 yards from camp. We had seen a sow and a cub down on the beach, not too far from where I was getting this the water. So our camp was kind of up on a bench. We had to climb up about 30 feet up this little bluff. We found a little depression where it kind of had some protection. That's where we had the camp. It was dark and it was wet, and I knew better. I didn't bring my binos. I knew better, you know. It's just that classic case of, you know, never to let your guard down. I go down there and I'm filling. It took a while. We just had a little trickle, so it took a while for me to fill my water jugs. And I could look across the beach where we were seeing, and I've got pretty good vision, but it was dark and it was raining, wind was blowing, and I was kind of looking. And Todd, every night, about every third night, we'd need to get water. Well, Todd would, while I was getting water anyways, I knew Todd was always, you know, glassing from camp, you know, because we could see this beach, about probably 2 miles of beach line. I heard a noise, I looked up, and well, Todd had seen a bear. And so through the wind and the rain, I got up, grabbed his binoculars, and I'm like, man, the thing's dark. I said, it's a mature bear. I could see its neck and its head. Its neck was full. You know, that's kind of a good indicator with particularly on boars, when their neck is thinner than their head, they're sub-adult. And I said, well, it's got a thick neck and it's really dark. I said, I'll just stay here. I'm going to run and get my binoculars. And so I ran back to camp, or actually then Todd had to grab his rifle. So he grabbed his rifle, I had my rifle, grabbed my video camera, and we kind of went back out, got a visual on the bear. Well, at this point, the bear was coming towards us. And so I didn't get a great look at it. Well, now, at that point, it had turned around and was walking the other way. So it's kind of trailing this sow and this cub. And so, I mean, it makes sense that it's a boar. Well, eventually the bear just stops and it kind of turns around. It's kind of sniffing, checking out the beach, kind of just going like this, you know. And as we're chasing after the bear, because it's about a mile away, and I'm just like, it's so dark. We gotta get up on this bear first. And as we're sneaking up on the bear, we bump into that sow and cub that we had seen from the hill earlier. She was about 50 yards away. She stands up and woofs and takes off and runs away. And we're cruising as fast as we can. At this point, the bear is working along. The bear we're after is working along the beach, heading straight away from us. And I'm like, dang it. And it was right in the area where we saw the big bear. And so that's kind of the area we were kind of expecting it to appear. And so I just told Todd, I'm like, you know, I said, it's a mature bear. I said, and I'm guessing that it's him. I mean, in my heart, I wanted it to be him. And I knew it was a mature bear, and it was so dark. It was so much darker than the sow, and which is pretty typical. The boars are generally very dark. But again, it is dark, it's wet, and it's windy. And so my binoculars, as soon as and the wind's blowing right in our face, which is ideal for stalking, but you know, to look at the bear, and every time we stop, the bear gets farther away. Well, so I pulled on my predator call, and I squealed, and the bear stopped. And the bear stopped, and when it stopped, it like turned and went right behind a huge boulder. And so all I could see was its head. And I remember, you know, a big bear, the ears are out to the side of the head. And this bear, the ears were, you know, they weren't real close together like a young bear, kind of about average. And I remembered about that big bear that we saw several days earlier. I noticed he didn't have big ears, but I noticed his ears weren't very far apart, you know, just as I was judging it. But I mean, there was no doubt on that bear, it was huge. I mean, I saw him in the wide open, you know, just walking. I had plenty of time to study. And I actually much prefer to judge almost any animal I find, you know, through a spotting scope at about a mile away. That's the easiest way to judge. When you're up close to an animal, that's when it's hardest to judge, because everything looks big, and usually you're under more pressure to make a decision. So this bear just stops and looks at us, and all we can see is his head. And its ears seemed too big. And so that's when I first okay, I'm not so sure about this. And so I turned to Todd and I said, you know, I think it's him, but I said, if we sit here and wait for him to step out, because at that point we're like 700 yards away still. If we wait for him, you know, if we wait to try to judge him, we're probably not going to get a chance at this bear. I said, are you cool if we just go all in and we get the opportunity to take him, we take him? And he's like, yes. He's like, we're on the same page, because he knew what was going on. That, you know, we just didn't want to sit there and you know, try to judge and make sure it was the right bear. Yep, that's him. And by that point, he walks up and over the hill, and we're out of time, because I mean, we're down to like a half an hour max of shooting light, and there are no shooting hours in Alaska. But obviously, the darker it gets more everything gets exponentially more difficult, dangerous, trivial. Trivial, that would mean like minor details, maybe. not trivial, I guess that's probably not the right word, but just more opportunity for things to go awry. And the old Siwash, old Jimmy Schwindler, that guided in Alaska for 40 years, his rule was, I don't remember, I think it was 2 hours before dark, you were done hunting. He said, we can sit up here until dark and glass, but if we're not after a bear 2 hours from dark, we're not going after it. He goes, because when it gets dark, that's when mistakes are made and bad things happen. And so here we were. But last day, the next day we figure we're not going to be hunting because it's too windy. At that point, we just figure we have nothing to lose. Well, long story short, this bear ends up going back, turns from the rock, and he starts heading away from us again. We actually started moving while he was kind of looking in our direction because the bear's eyesight isn't that great. Kind of got up against this bank and we were still sneaking along. Never got to the area to where the bear's tracks were. You know, that would have been kind of ideal. And I'm sure you can kind of see where we're going with this, or where I'm going with this story. But we get set up. It was 300 yards, which I knew Todd could shoot. He shot his whitetail here at like 300 yards, and he practiced a lot. I mean, he knew we had a dial-in turret. The longest I've ever had a hunter shoot a bear was 240 yards before that. And I said, what are you comfortable at? He's like, 300. If I got an open shot, and he had shooting sticks that he practiced with all the time. And he's just like, if I get 300, I'll make the shot. I'm like, all right. And so, I mean, we're running for all we're worth. I mean, we are hot, soaking wet, didn't have rain gear on. Get set up 300 yards. The bear is still kind of going away from us. And I put my binoculars up, and I'm kind of trying to judge the bear. And I'm just like, you know what? It's go time. And he was just headed up this little, I guess it was a hill. He was right on the edge of it. And if he'd have got up over that hill and there was nothing but brush beyond that, I figured he's gone forever. And there was a trail right there. I guess that's a cow. Sounds like it's sick or something. So anyways, get set up, squeal at the bear. I ended up filming, you know, I was filming it. And Todd, boom, makes the shot. Boom, the bear goes down. He stays on the bear, and never. I mean, it just kind of rolled around and growled a little bit, but that was it, you know. And we're like, holy smokes! And I'm like, man, I said, I don't know how big that bear is. I said, you know, good shot. And he's just like, man, we had nothing to lose. So we get up, we start walking towards it, and we come to the tracks in the sand, and I'm like, man, sorry to tell you, that's not him. You know, you could just tell by the tracks that it wasn't a big enough bear. And so I kind of figured what it was. At that point, I knew that it's got to be a sow, because I would have known right off. Sounds weird, but it's pretty easy to differentiate, very easy, I dare say, or one of the easier decisions or calls to make is the difference between a 9-foot bear and a 10-foot bear, a boar. Because you can really tell, the difference is easy to tell. Personally, I find, you know, a mature bear, a mature boar versus a mature sow, if you have a little bit of time to study them in good light, you know, it just takes a little bit of time, and more often than not, and everybody's makes a few mistakes on this stuff. Don't get me wrong, but it's more difficult to judge between like a big mature boar and a big mature sow than it is like a 9-foot boar to a 10-foot boar. That's really easy, because you'll just see the younger, more immature boars are real long and limby. I mean, some people have shot like 7-foot bears, like kick-out cubs, because they're kind of plump and fat, you know. But the head, what I like to look at is the head. How many head-shaped dots can you fit in the neck, shoulders, and in the body? You know, a small bear, you'll get like 6. You know, a big bear, you'll get 12 or more. You know, a giant, you're getting 15 or more. But at any rate, I knew right off, it's like, all right, there's got to be a sow, you know. And again, because the bear was so dark, but I've seen it happen. I knew better, you know, before when it's wet, the bears look darker, and that's not a perfect. You're more likely to see light-colored boars than you are really dark sows. But this bear was dark, but it was dark and wet. So anyways, we get up to it, and we knew beforehand it wasn't the big bear. And then I figured, it's about 8.5 to 9 foot sow. It ended up taping about 8, 9. And probably one of, Todd is a businessman. He's got 180 employees. And I'm just like, well, he goes, I just said, and he's like, hey man, it's a good bear. He's got a good hide. He's like, I was at the end of my time, He's like, yeah, knowing what I know now, he's like, honestly, we wouldn't have done it any different. He said, if we'd have known that that's what, that it was a sow, he's like, yeah, I wouldn't have shot it. He's like, I'm going to come back someday and get a big bear. In that area, you can't come back after you shoot a bear. You can't come back for 4 years to hunt again. But Todd's like, that's one thing I've never had a problem with. He goes, is I can make a decision and I live with it. I'm good with it. He's like, yeah, I'll look back on it. I'll probably learn from it. And I make mistakes, but he goes, I've just learned over the years that you just can't second guess yourself. And he said, because I was kind of, I apologized to him. I felt bad. I just felt like, man, after 20 some years of doing this, I shouldn't have made that mistake. I should have known that there's a lot of factors adding up here, Billy, that are causing you to rush into this. But as Todd said, this is probably our last day of hunting. We kind of had nothing to lose. And the thing that stuck with me, he goes, you know what? If we had to do it all over again, if the circumstances were the same and we did it all over again, we wouldn't do anything different. And maybe he was right. And he handled it like a man, maybe. But yeah, I was beating myself up. I have a tendency to do that. I'm kind of a perfectionist. And as with all these stories, I kind of, sorry to just make this about me, but I kind of feel like that's kind of the only way that, to the points that I can talk about, and I just got to figure that there's a fair number of people out there that can relate to this, and hopefully to the end point of my story. I felt like, that I didn't do my job, and I take that seriously. So there's a level of ego and pride there that's good, but then there's a level that's not good. I felt embarrassed. I felt partly ashamed, but there was also a part of me that 10 years ago, I wasn't as embarrassed and ashamed as I probably would have been 10 years ago, because I've made enough mistakes and been humbled enough that I do know that I'm not perfect and I'm not going to get it right every time. So we left the bear there. We rolled it over on its back, pulled it up. We were able to kind of roll it and got it above high tide, so we were sure it'd be there for the morning, because it's at this point it's like dark and we're soaking wet. Go back to camp, and laying there in bed at night, so it's like after midnight by the time we go to bed, probably 12:30, 1 o'clock. We ate a little supper, and we were happy. I mean, the mood wasn't like totally somber. I mean, it was kind of nice. It was the end of the hunt. We had a good adventure. We had a good hunt. We saw one of the big bears, and we just got dealt a hand, and we took a chance, and we went all in, and we didn't have the hand we thought we had. I was laying there in bed, and I was thinking, and I was praying. And this whole time, this whole hunt, my back had been getting progressively better. It was kind of like releasing of the stress, and just it felt so good to be in nature. And I mean, I felt really, really good. But that day, the day we shot that bear, I was more uncomfortable than I had been the whole entire hunt. And especially when I'm sitting. If I'm hiking around like sheep hunting, I feel great. But sitting in one spot, just glassing, that's like the worst thing for me. And because it was wet, cold, and all that good stuff, I don't know, my back, I was just in a lot of discomfort. And I remember that day, more so than any day, I was praying a lot. And I just felt that I hadn't had any, it seems like almost every hunt I kind of, I don't know, I had peace the whole entire time, but just like, Lord, why is it that I'm feeling pain today? You know, why is that? When before I've been getting progressively better. And it seemed like it was maybe like my mindset. I don't know, I just didn't have the same peace of mind that day as I'd had other days. And I think that's where the pain was coming from, not the pain was first and then the peace of mind followed. Because I think that's kind of counterintuitive, and that's kind of what I've always thought. You know, it's like, oh, my back hurts today, you know, and oh, I didn't have a very good day because my back hurt. Well, usually what I'm starting to believe more is my back hurt because I wasn't having a good day. I wasn't, you know, I just didn't have peace in my mind, but more and more I'm coming to grasp this discernment that the pain and the discomfort is coming more from the Spirit. I think the Spirit is leading, the mind is following, and then the body is following the mind. And so I prayed on that hill, and I just said, Lord, I have to believe you can teach me something in this. And I just said, what, you know, just God promises that if we pray for wisdom, that He will give it to us. I said, Lord, give me discernment and give me wisdom in this matter. Teach me what it is that I need to learn so that I'm closer to you. And so that was up on the hill, you know, as we're glassing throughout the day. And be still and know that I am God. It just kept coming to me and over and over and over again that day as well, and kind of throughout that whole hunt, because you're sitting still on a brown bear hunt a lot, and you're just glassing. And I laid in my tent, and I'm praying, and all of a sudden I just felt peace. Because I was thinking back my whole life. I've always kind of done that. I've always struggled to find peace. And peace was always fleeting. Whenever I found it, I could never hold on to it very long. I was very much trying to do the next work of the world, or the work of the flesh, as the Bible would call it, is one more attainment. You know, if I'd get first place, or I'd win a wrestling tournament, you know, then I'd find peace for a little bit. Or if I'd have a good basketball game and score a lot of points, or if, you know, I got an A on a test, or, you know, whatever it was, if I hit a home run in baseball, or, you know, all those things. But then they've never like stuck, you know. But in nature, I just, like, anytime I was immersed in nature, that was the only time peace ever stuck for me. And I'm laying there and I'm just like, Lord, why is it that I let things that are out of my control bother me? You know, why is it that I can't accept the fact that I didn't do this one perfect, that I came up somewhat short. You know, I didn't do a perfect job on this one, but, you know, why was I beating myself up over this? Yeah, there's something that I can learn professionally, but in the end, my hunter's happy. You know, why am I not at peace with this? And I knew there was a level of ego and pride there, but I just felt it's like, nah, there's more to it, because I've dealt with that my whole life, like never being 100% satisfied with virtually anything. And I'm just like, God, why is that? And this peace comes over me, and I just felt God speaking to me, and He just said, because you're concerned of everyone's judgment. My judgment is the only one that matters. And when I received that, That was it. That was all I needed. And I'm just like, it was something that I knew, and I know, but it's like we relearn these things in various aspects and at different times, because a lot of times we lose sight of it. You know, I was to a degree embarrassed, you know, that's kind of a rookie mistake that I made. But again, in the same token, it's like Todd said, would we have done it? We wouldn't have done it any different, you know, because the last thing we could afford to do was to let a chance slip through our fingers, you to sit there in the binoculars and that bear to walk up over that hill, and you to say, yeah, that's him, and, you know, try to shoot him in the butt or whatever, or just never get a shot at him. You know, that would have been heartbreaking, you know. Same token, maybe that's what we should have done and risked him getting away. You know, I'm still learning. I mean, I'm still not convinced 100% that that's exactly the way we should have done it, but it is. It's the decision I made, the decision we made, and that's hunting. That's life. And at the end of the day, if Todd's happy with it, why shouldn't I be happy with it? I mean, I never got an inkling. Yeah, I'm sure Todd would have been more excited if it was that 10-foot bear that we'd have seen before. But I never got an inkling from him that he was like really disappointed. I mean, he's like, man, I want to come back and do it again, you know. And so I've talked about that before. You know, I talked about it with Peter, how his pride, you know, got him into trouble sometimes. But in the same token, once Peter received the Holy Spirit, and Jesus came back to him and told him 3 times, Peter, feed my sheep, feed my lambs. You know, Peter was the boldest of all the disciples, arguably. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's not even much argument with that. He was the boldest of all of them. The original disciples, you know, Paul maybe was more so. And this is not the message that I was planning on giving, but just on the drive over here, it just came to me. I find so often, and this is what I love about the Alaska wilderness, man, I hope this isn't getting too long, is the more I go out on a limb, because I felt this before I left, you know, I'm kind of working through this compression fracture I have in my back and doing different things, and I've been staying away from strength training on purpose, and I've been losing a lot of weight, but I'm trying to get my spine in alignment and my glutes and get my body, bring back the connectivity of my body. And so what's been happening is, like, if I try to like squat anything or lift anything heavy, my poor mechanics that I've developed, they take over, and then I'll end up re-injuring something or just putting stress on the parts of my body that I'm trying to get away from. And so I went into this whole hunt like the weakest I've ever been in 23 years. And so there was this like apprehension and fear that, you know, I wouldn't be able to pack out a bear hide or whatever. But that's when we're the strongest, because that's when we lean on God the most. And I'm telling you, I had so much peace before I went to Alaska because I was relying wholly on Him. I was trusting Him. I couldn't worry about anything else because I needed Him so bad in my weakness, so much that I was just focused on Him and His promises. And that gave me strength going into that hunt. And that's why I believe we have to stretch ourselves. We have to test ourselves all the time. The world wants us to be comfortable. The world wants to say, oh, here's a steady paycheck. Here's security, job security. I believe, I hope this comes out the right way, but I believe in a lot of ways, many, many ways, security is like death to the spirit. We need, I mean, you read the Bible, especially if you read what Paul writes. I mean, that's basically what Paul's whole ministry was about, is like, hey, it's going to be tough, but get out there and do it again. I am most alive when I have the most, like, fear. And no, I shouldn't say that. Fear, it's like you have fear or anxieties or whatever, but once you get into it, and once you get into a position where it's like, all right, you make the decision where I'm doing this, it's like most of the fear goes away, because you can only focus on what's going to give you results, like what is necessary to focus on. If you're lazy, and you got the old adage, idle hands are the devil's workshop, I believe that is true, and that's what's going on in our world big time. We're doling out free money, and these people, they got nothing but free money, and it's backfiring. It's counterintuitive perhaps, but when you have nothing, or when you have very, very little, when you believe you have nothing, you will search for something. And Jesus is always there. He will never leave us, never forsake us. So if you want to find Jesus, get down to nothing. That's about the moral of the story. And so I came to this in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, chapter 11, verses 24 to 30. From the Jews, this is Paul speaking, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep. Not sure what that means. Night and a day I've been in the deep. 26 in journeys often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fasting often, in cold and nakedness. Besides the other thing, what comes up upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to stumble, and I do not burn with indignation? And I do not, that's with a question mark, and I do not burn with indignation. I guess indignation would be been treated poorly, unjustly. If I must boast, I will boast in the things with which concern my infirmity. So his weakness. He will boast in his weakness, because he knows that in his weakness, that's what's going to take him to the next level. That's where his next spiritual food is going to come from, is that God will never leave us nor forsake us. When you need him, if you are seeking him, seek ye first the kingdom of God, he will be there. He will show up. He will give us what we need. Chapter 12, 2 Corinthians, still chapter 12, verse 7. And lest I should be exalted above measure by the abundance of the revelations, a thorn in the flesh was given to me. So he's saying, of the things that I learn, that I proclaim, and these spiritual things that I know, I don't want to be exalted because of them. A thorn in my flesh was given to me. I don't know if that's like a physical thorn or a physical ailment of some sort. I don't know as that we know. Or just something... Okay, here we go. A messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I be exalted above measure. So, a messenger of Satan. So there was some stronghold that Satan had over of Paul, which he's basically saying it was a good thing, is that it kept him humble. He didn't want it, and I think later on he says that he prayed a number of times for God to take it away from him, but he didn't. Concerning this thing, right here. Concerning this thing I pleaded the Lord 3 times that if it might depart from me. And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities than the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore I take pleasure in infirmities, in weaknesses, in reproaches, in needs, and persecutions, in distresses. For Christ's sake, when I am weak, then I am strong. what most people say, a lot of people, and I think I've mentioned this before, is when I'd do sport shows, I'd see it all the time. I'd be sitting at a booth, people'd see my backdrop, and they'd say, "Oh man, it must be nice. That's for doctors and lawyers." That's an easy cop-out. That's an easy excuse to think, you know, that's just a language. But I tell my kids that's loser language. That's you're defeating, you're losing before you even play the game. Like, oh, we can never beat them. I can never have that. I could never do that. With that attitude, you never will. But I mean, that's maybe a little bit off topic. But if we're totally self-sufficient, it's pretty hard to stay connected with God. We have to step out. We have to have adventure. And not just like a hunting adventure to speak, but I mean adventure in life where we're stepping into the unknown. Adventure begins when things go wrong. Adventure is found where our nothing is guaranteed. And in the world, that's what everybody seems to be seeking, you know, security. And that is the death of the spirit. It just is. I mean, if I've learned anything or if I believe anything, it's that. If you're seeking nothing but security, you will, whenever you find it, you will be disappointed. That's it. Everything in nature strives to maximize its potential until death. And I believe that's the way God wants us to live. In seeking Him, no matter how old you are, you're going to come into trials and tribulations. It just is, there's no doubt about it. If you're doing anything, if you're moving forward, if you're striving at all, if you're seeking to do His will, fear and selfishness is not of God. If you're seeking to do anything, the hardships will come, but I don't know if revelation is the right word, but in our weakness, we will discover more of God's strength. That's basically it. Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day, Lord. Thank you for my safety on my recent trip, the safety of my family. I thank you for drawing me closer to you in that experience. Lord, that I ask that you be with those that are feeling emptiness and looking for more, that are trying to discern your world, your will, your kingdom, which is in heaven, trying to understand that they are not of this world. We are not to be of this world, that we are to be strangers in this world, that we will face persecutions and trials and tribulations. Help us all to move forward boldly, to proclaim your name and the gospel of your Son, Jesus Christ. Lord, I ask that you be with Don Johnson and his family, with my mother-in-law Kim and Tim and all of our family. Grant them peace. Continue to heal Kim. Be with the family of the young man who recently passed in Minnesota. Be with his children, his spouse. Lord, a special blessing of provision over them, and guidance and peace. Lord, be with Tom as he's battling cancer. And Lord, call to those in the Bozeman area that you feel, that call to them, that those that need to come to this event coming up on June 10th, Lord. And give me the words and strengthen my testimony, and Special blessing to those that are involved to host the event. Lord, you will bring the people that need to be there. And Lord, I ask for a special blessing over the military men and women who have, particularly those that have seen battle and seen human beings at their worst, and are battling to understand that and tread through that in this life. Lord, I ask for your peace upon them, to bless them and their families, draw them closer to you, so that they will be able to move forward in this earthly life and be a testament to you and a testament to your love. We ask for all these things in the name of your precious Son, Jesus. Amen. Yeah, I feel like I went pretty long on that. Hopefully that's not the case, but I don't even know when I started. I need to get myself a clock here. But yeah, if you're in the Bozeman area, I hope to see you there. Yeah, it'll be Thursday night, and yeah, that's about it. Just 24 years I've been doing this now, and that's what keeps me on my toes. I've experienced it many times. It just, yeah, when the worst thing is when I kind of have like nothing to do, like nothing pressing where, yeah, I don't seem to do well with that. I have to be looking forward to there has to be something pushing me, and I just feel like there's a lot of people that just don't feed that. They don't fuel that. That is my encouragement. Maybe it's a hunting adventure, maybe it's something personal, or maybe selfish, like maybe it's a hunting trip that, how could I ever afford to do that? Like, there's people that go up on these hunting trips in Alaska that, this one guy cuts wood all summer long, and like every 2 or 3 years he can afford to go on a hunting trip. I guess my point is that that makes you feel alive. Yeah, and that's honestly, that's what I love about it, is when I'm in the wilderness of Alaska, you are vulnerable. There are more things out of your control, and that's what draws me closer to God, and I cherish that. Yeah, I recognize that, every time I kiss my family, there's a better chance that I won't see them. If I stay home, I will be safer. But if I don't go, spiritually, I will die. So until next time, trust the guide. And don't second guess the guide. Maybe we're going to maybe that'll be the next lesson.